Hello everyone, today we will be going over home network troubleshooting. I have already done a video on the basic types of home network setups that you can do, so today we're actually going over troubleshooting them. When the internet starts acting up, most people will call their ISP and start yelling at them and complaining about their service and so on and so forth. While calling your ISP isn't always a bad thing because sometimes they do go down, or sometimes there needs to be a configuration update on your modem, calling and yelling at them usually isn't the best way to go about troubleshooting. On top of that, there could always be something that is actually wrong with one of your devices. So a quick overview of some of the basic home networks that you may have are a modem router combo, and these are generally provided by your internet service provider. You might have a modem and a router separate. You could also have a modem, a router, and a switch. Or you might have a mesh network, so a modem and then multiple mesh nodes. So we're going to go over the basics of troubleshooting all of those. There are some additional variations that you may have, such as a physical firewall or a bridged network on your home network. Due to the amount of custom configurations, those are a lot harder to set up and explain how to troubleshoot, so I won't be going over those in this video. The basics before you start troubleshooting all of your network devices. You should verify that the issue is not isolated to a specific device. So say you've got a computer that isn't, whether it's wired or wireless, say it's not working correctly, it's either not connected or it's extremely slow or the internet's intermittent. You want to troubleshoot your device. But if multiple devices are actually experiencing network issues and most of them are the same type of issues, then we need to start troubleshooting your actual networking devices. So we're going to start with the easiest and then get a little more complicated. So the easiest one is going to be your modem router combo. What you need to do is unplug any wired devices that are going into the modem router device. So when I say unplug, you want to unplug all the Ethernet cables. Then you want to disconnect any wireless devices and then unplug the power from your modem router combo. You want to wait 60 seconds and then plug that back in, or plug the power back in. From that point on, you want to troubleshoot all of your devices individually. Start with your wired devices if you have any. Plug in one at a time, check that device. If it's not working, then we'll cover that. But if it is working, do that to all of your wired devices one by one. Once all of your wired devices check out, you want to move on to your wireless devices. Check those one by one. So connect one of those devices, make sure it's working. Connect the next one, make sure it's working, so on and so forth. If all of your devices are working except for one, then that isolated device needs to be troubleshooted on its own because that one's obviously having an issue. If you plug in, if all of your devices are working and then you connect a device, whether it's wireless or wired, and then all of your other devices start having issues, you know there's something wrong with that individual device, whether it's a NIC card or something else. So you want to disconnect that one from the network and figure out what's going on with it. Say you've done all the troubleshooting that I've already listed and the issue persists. Then you should call your ISP. Find out if they have any type of outages. Also inform them that you've rebooted your devices, including your network hardware. You've detached any wired devices. You disconnected all your wireless devices. And then they can go from there. Because the thing is that your modem might need a configuration update, and there is potential that you need to reset it back to factory settings. If this is a ISP device, then I would wait for their instructions to reset it back to factory settings. If it's your own modem router combo, reset back to factory settings prior to calling your ISP. If all else fails, they might end up sending you new hardware, or you might have to buy your own. So if you have a modem and a router separate, so two different devices, not combined into one like the last one, you're going to go over a lot of the same basic troubleshooting steps that we just talked about. So what you'll start with is you'll disconnect your router from your modem. Start your troubleshooting by taking one of your hardwired devices that was plugged into your router, if you had a hardwired device, and you'll plug that wired device directly into your modem. If the device works, then you know to start troubleshooting from your router. If the device does not work, then we'll start troubleshooting from your modem. To start troubleshooting from your modem, you want to disconnect all of your devices from, like, all your hardwired devices, all of your wireless devices, just like previously mentioned. You'll unplug your modem for 60 seconds, and then you'll also unplug your router at the same time and leave it unplugged until you troubleshoot your until you troubleshoot your modem. After 60 seconds, power up your modem, test the wired device again. If this fails, restore your modem back to factory settings and then try again. If this fails, call your ISP, explain the issue. You might need a configuration update. If that doesn't fix it, you will need new hardware, or you might need new cable running into your house. You can work with your ISP on that bit. If the wired device works with your modem, unplug that device, plug in your router, and then you need to start checking your wired devices one by one by plugging them into your router and making sure everything works. If everything works, move on to your wireless devices. If any of your devices, wired or wireless, fail, you will want to go ahead and reset your router back to factory settings. If that does not fix the issue, and you've already contacted your ISP to see if there's any other configuration updates for your modem, then you'll probably need a new router, or try new Ethernet cables. If all else fails on a wired device or anywhere that you use, anything that is wired, you'll want to check your cables, check all your connections as well, especially on like coaxial cables, because a lot of those, like if you have them teed off somewhere, those will fail more often than the cable will. So if you have cable internet, definitely check that. For a modem, router, and switch setup, a lot of your troubleshooting is going to build upon the previous two setups. You'll follow all the steps that I just showed you. When you disconnect devices from your router, be sure to disconnect your switch. Also power down your switch. You want to narrow down the issue to whether it's wired or wireless devices, because there's potential that when you have a switch connected to your network, there could be a wired device that has a bad NIC that is flooding the network. And this could also go for the previous step as well. If you have a device plugged directly into your router, then that could also have a bad NIC on it that would end up causing other issues. Go ahead and replace cables between your routers and your switch. Unplug all cables from your switch and reboot the switch from the online interface, or if you can't access that, unplug your switch for 60 seconds, then plug it back in. Keep in mind the switch here, this is after you've already done all your troubleshooting for your modem and your router. Just like in previous steps, you'll want to unplug each of your patch cables from your switch, and then you want to plug in each one by one and test each device one at a time, verifying that each device is working. If one device isn't working, or if you plug in a device and then all other devices stop working, you need to troubleshoot that individual device. If all the devices are working, that's great. If multiple devices aren't working, you need to reset your switch back to factory settings. If that doesn't work, you should consider getting a new switch. Another troubleshooting tip is you can take your switch, and if you're using an Ethernet cable to plug in from your router to your switch, you can actually take that cable and unplug it from the router and plug it directly into the modem and see if your devices plugged into your switch works. If it does, then your router or a port on the router is bad. In order to know if it's just the port or the modem, plug your switch back into the router and try all the different ports on the back. Typically your router will have 4 ports. If the switch and the devices connected to the switch aren't working on any of those ports, you need a new router. If they're working on 3 of the 4 or 2 of the 4 ports, you know that you have 1, 2, or 3 bad ports and your other one is fine. If you have multiple bad ports, I would still suggest getting a new router, because chances are that router is going to fail on you shortly. If the issue is wireless rather than wired, what you'll want to do is disconnect your switch from the router and disconnect all wired devices from your router and see if that fixes the issue. If not, reset your router back to factory settings and try again. Again, you might need a new router, but try multiple ports on the switch on the router, or connecting the switch to the router. See if that fixes it. Any wired devices, rather than plugging them directly into the routers, try to plug them into the switch if possible. So try different combinations, try new cables. You'd be surprised at what works, because sometimes you just have a bad port somewhere. Sometimes you have just a bad device, whether it's a networking device or a computer or a phone or so on. So our final one that we're going to cover is the mesh network. These can be a little bit trickier than your traditional because you have multiple mesh nodes that act as routers. If you have a switch as well on your network, you'll basically want to repeat what you've already done. You'll do it in a little bit different order. First, you'll disconnect any wired devices from all of your mesh nodes. You'll want to disconnect your switch if you have that connected to one of your mesh nodes. You'll want to power down all mesh nodes. You'll troubleshoot your modem, just like we've already gone over. After you have troubleshot your modem, you'll want to go ahead and start with the first mesh node that has an Ethernet cable that plugs from your mesh node to the modem itself. If they are working, if your network starts working at that point, what you'll want to do is plug in one more additional mesh node and troubleshoot it like you did the first one. If that's working, then you continue until all mesh nodes are connected and working, as well as all wireless devices are connected and working. And then you will start with your wired devices. For mesh nodes, I always suggest working with your wireless devices first, because chances are you don't have all of your wired devices plugged into each individual mesh node. Usually you only have your wired devices plugged into one mesh node, and then however many other mesh nodes you have, 1, 2, 3, 4 additional mesh nodes, they typically are purely wireless rather than having any wired devices to them. That's not always the case, but that's generally what happens in most home networks. So start with your wireless first. Once all your wireless devices have been tested and everything's working, then start troubleshooting your wired devices as we've previously mentioned. Plug them in one at a time, test them out. If any network device is not working, whether it's your modem, your mesh nodes, or your switch, then you want to reset that device back to factory settings. There is potential that your devices may need to be replaced. To sum everything up, here's a few quick points. Reboot your network equipment. This is a good idea just for the simple fact that most people don't reboot any of their network equipment, and so it's online 24/7, 365 days a year. Always check all of your wired connections between devices. Sometimes you just have a bad cable. As mentioned earlier, sometimes your coaxial connections aren't good. They go bad over time. Always check all connections going in and through the house. So go outside, check your connection, make sure nothing's been damaged from a storm or plants or animals or whatever. Make sure everything's good going into the house. If you can, make sure everything's good going through the house. And check, as mentioned, check all your connectors as well. Replace any wires and connectors as necessary. Some might actually require a call to your internet service provider. I know it's never fun, but sometimes you just need to restore your networking equipment back to factory defaults. It really sucks when you've got a device such as a switch or a router or a firewall that you have a lot of customization done to. Doesn't hurt to call your ISP and ask for a modem update if that's necessary, because sometimes, you never know, sometimes the issue is literally just your modem needs to be updated with new settings. If you find that a single device is still having issues while everything else is working, or if everything stops working when this device is plugged in, then there could be something wrong with that device. As mentioned, it could have a bad NIC on there. It could be infected with some sort of malware or virus. And honestly, maybe that device, whether it's a computer, a phone, a tablet, and so on, maybe that device just needs to be restored back to factory settings, or maybe it just needs a reboot. So I know a lot of this seems pretty basic and straightforward, but you'd be surprised at how many people that I've talked with just go and unplug their device for a couple seconds, immediately plug it back in, and then don't even wait for it to boot up, call their ISP and just start yelling and cussing. Really, that's not going to get you a whole lot of places. Start with the easy stuff. Check your devices, check your cables, check your hardware, like your network hardware devices. Go ahead and reboot devices, restore factory settings, however you need to. Just do all your troubleshooting before getting irate. Some people actually work backwards. You'll start with a device, and then you'll start with, if it's a wireless device, you'll start troubleshooting it and then troubleshoot the router. If it's a wired device, you'll troubleshoot the device, you'll troubleshoot the cable, and then the switch or the router. And then some people actually prefer to start with a source. So they'll start with the modem and the connection to it from outside the house, and then they'll kind of branch out from there. Starting from the source will take a little bit longer in most situations. It usually fixes all the equipment to reboot each one by one, and then check all your devices from there. However you do it, just get it done, and then call your ISP and see if they can help you. But a lot of your network issues can be figured out by just troubleshooting on your own. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave any comments or questions below. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you.